Okay. Es gab eine Frage, soll ich das auf Deutsch oder Englisch machen? Ich würde es gerne auf Englisch machen, weil ich hatte jetzt den Eindruck, dass bei den vorhergehenden Keynotes das kein Problem war. Wer in dem Raum hier hat ein absolut großes Problem mit Englisch? Bitte ehrliche Antwort. Blöd gestellte Frage. Ich habe aber die deutsche Version kein Problem, habe ich auch schon ein paar Mal gemacht. Aber ich kenne ein paar Leute hier, die mit Deutsch nicht gut zurechtkommen. Okay, I do it in English. If you are struggling with wording and so on, we have a good Q&A later on, and I can explain things again. So, okay, I'm Hendrik Esser. I'm having two jobs. One is the job that pays my money is the one for Ericson, where I'm head of a staff unit of a 7,500 people organization, which is internationally distributed. So in Ericson, everything is super large scale. And there I'm running a gang that's called Operations and Programs. So looking after the operational development of the organization. It's a bit of organizational coaching, but also the figures and targets and strategies and so on. The other job I'm doing is it's a voluntary job that I do for the Agile Alliance. There I'm running the Supporting Agile Adoption program that is sponsored by the Alliance. And the talk I'm going to do now is a result of both my practical experiences in Ericson and the work that I've done together with a number of people in this work team about supporting Agile adoption. So, leading in a complex world, experiencing a large-scale Agile transition. What we will talk about is a transformation story. So I will share the transformation story of the organization I was part of in 2008. That was a small organization, only 2,000 people. Then the second one suggests that there might be obstacles in doing the transformation because we have seen things that work and things that don't work. So we will look into why does it sometimes work and sometimes not. And then trying to find some learnings and find what's a better approach for generally going for transformation. And then looking at the example I start with, I look at this example again at the end, looking at the better approach, from a better approach perspective. So let's get going, a transformation story. So 2008, 2,000 people organization, we are sitting in the leadership team. Our business runs extremely well. We earn loads of money with our products and so on. Everybody is reasonably happy except one thing, and that is that all our projects are 6 to 18 months delayed. We are struggling a bit with quality on a manageable level, but this was the situation. So is there any need to change? Our business runs well. Well, in that leadership team, we said, okay, business runs well. It might not run so well in a couple of years, and then maybe it's much, much harder to change then. So let's initiate a change now, because all these project delays, they are not good. So let's start looking into how can we fix this. And what we did was we were discussing in the leadership team meetings on how to approach this. Do we need different work streams to work with this? Somebody mentioned Agile and so on. Then I raised my hand saying, I have actually looked at this Agile stuff and I have seen Google Tech Talks about it and Ken Schwaber and so on. And honestly, I think it's nice ideas, but this will never work in our organization. We are too big. Nobody can scale this. So we went into the exercise, built a couple of work streams, looking into different aspects. How can we test better? How can we take better decisions? How can we plan better? And what we also said is that this leadership team doesn't have the feet on the ground. If we really want to make a step forward, we need to ask the people doing the actual work. So we were inviting the organization to join us on this. And over a couple of months, we had more than 100 people from this 2,000 people organization joining us, creating proposals. So we are, at the end of that exercise, we had something like 500-600 PowerPoint slides with proposals how to do things differently. An enormous engagement around the organization. What we also found that we have a number of problems that we need to solve, like we are working too much in silos, how can we get out of the silos and so on. So we were saying maybe we need to reorganize. So we were planning a new organizational blueprint and all these kind of things. So then what we said was, okay, let's fix the organization. We had a new organization. This organization was brought in place on the 1st of January 2010. And then we really got agile from one moment to the next. Okay, almost. Of course, we needed to train people. We had train the trainer, coach the coaches approaches. We were slowly transforming the organization by finishing the old projects in the traditional style and the new projects in an agile style. And by the end of 2010, roughly, we had gone through a big turmoil of finding out what everything is, and we were really performing well. Okay, such a huge change for such a big organization in an even larger organization like Ericson, you cannot do without having your approval from your boss. So my boss's boss needed to be there to approve the new organizational blueprint and how we want to work. So we were inviting him, and at that time I was a bit the spokesperson for this leadership team because I was able to manage PowerPoint well. So this guy came, and then I was told, Hendrik, can you do a quick introduction for this guy? You have 20 minutes to explain to him the changes that we are doing and try to convince him that this is a good thing to do. Out of the 20 minutes, we got into a discussion of 1.5 hours. This guy got totally fired up about our ideas. He thought, this is absolutely fantastic. You really are on the right track. I fully support this. Since then, I also have a brand that says, Hendrik, give us a short introduction. Means you have 20 minutes, but it will take 1.5 hours. So that was that. So this guy got fired up. And what he did was, he was going to our neighboring organizations and saying, look what those guys are doing. This is fantastic. You really should this as well. So take their organizational blueprint, start using Scrum, and so on. Really, you need to do the same thing. What do you think has happened in the other organizations? So they started to adopt Scrum. They were not necessarily changing their management structures and so on. And a lot of them had a lot of struggle. So it took them, I think, 4 or 5 years before they were starting to be on a similar level like the organization that has initiated it originally. So sometimes it works, sometimes not. But why? Can we learn anything from that transition that this 2,000 people organization did? And to understand that, we need to look a bit into complexity. This picture was picked deliberately because this shows how we usually address changes in our companies. We have a pretty architectural view on this. So we see how things work, how things should flow, how things should be working and interconnected. And if we find a flaw, then we just build another, in this picture it would be a motorway, just to connect things in a better way, right? And this is our architecture of our organizations. What's missing here? People. Exactly, because when you zoom in, then you see the picture like this. Lots of people. People are always self-organized. Whether you like it or not, self-organization is always there, and you cannot stop it. That's an interesting insight, by the way. So those people, all of them have their personal goals. Some of these people are maybe going to work on this picture. Some are returning from work. Some are actually working. Some go shopping or whatever. They're all doing their little piece. So this looks pretty messy, right? So how can we, being used to these architectural pictures, how can we take this people, individual perspective more into account? This is impossible. It's like trying to control an ocean by trying to control every single little wave. This is impossible. You need to understand the concept of an ocean, and then you can maybe influence it. And this is a bit the thing that we want to understand better now. So how to address complexity? How can we approach this in a good way? So a couple of years back, in the Supporting Agile Adoption work group, we invited Dave Snowden, who is one of the guys who has been really deeply working with the topic of complexity. And probably many of you have seen this before, but I will go quickly through a model that he has developed. He was actually writing a Harvard Business Review article in 2007. He said it took about 5 years before people really started to grasp the real idea behind this one. So I tried to explain this. Cynefin, so he's an intellectual Welsh guy, Dave Snowden, so he uses complex words sometimes. Cynefin, what is this? It means the place of multiple belongings, which sounds really mysterious, and maybe I can explain this in a while, why it's called like this. Dave says, as any good framework, this is a 2x2 matrix, and this is actually a sense-making framework. So as a leader in an organization, you are confronted with a situation, a context, or a problem, and now you need to make sense. What kind of problem is it, and how do I solve this? So how does it work? On the lower right side, you see problems that are in the obvious domain. Problems that are obvious. Obvious means cause and effect are in a very straight relationship. So if I would drop this thing here, it would fall down. I know exactly what happens. How do you approach this from a leadership or management perspective? Well, you sense, you look at this, you know you have seen this a number of times before, so you can categorize it, and then you know what to do. You can respond. And that's the domain of best practices. There's exactly one way to let this thing fall down, meaning by letting it go. So this is obvious. Then things maybe start to become a bit more complicated. Complicated means cause and effect are still in a very straight relation, but it's a bit more complicated. How do you go about these things? Okay, you sense, you look at this. Can you categorize it? Well, it's complicated, so you need to think a little bit, so you need to analyze it before you know what to do. And that's the domain of good practices. How often do we hear, use my best practice? That's worthwhile to think about and to really distinguish between those two domains, best practices and good practices. Now, on the right-hand side of this chart, there is one thing that is not existing on the left-hand side of the chart. On the right side of the chart, what is existing is predictability. On the left side of the chart, predictability is gone, and then things become very spooky and complex. So, how do we, when we are confronted with a complex situation, meaning predictability is gone, meaning, okay, I can look in hindsight, I can look back in history and say, okay, at that time we decided this, and that had that consequence, and that's why we are here today. That you can say, but it is impossible to say, if I take this decision today, this is exactly the outcome in the organization. Not possible. How to go about this kind of problems? Yeah, now we are stunned. You need to experiment your way forward. So you probe, you try to understand what do I see from my underlying system, from my organization, and by trying to understand this, you try to figure out what do I want to try next, and then I try something, see whether it goes into the right direction. If it does, I continue on that path. If it doesn't, I try something else. That's in a nutshell how you deal with complex situations. And that's the domain of emergent practice. It's emergent because you cannot predetermine it. You need to live with whatever emerges out of your organization. And then you need to steer going on to take the next experiment. On the lower left corner, then we have chaos. You can be confronted with a chaotic situation, so predictability is totally gone. Cause and effect are really wild. How do you deal with these situations? Well, just do something, just act. See whether what you are doing is leading you into the right direction, and if it does, you continue that path. If not, you need to try something else. And that's the domain of novel practice. So creativity and new things, innovation is usually happening in these kind of domains. So chaos is actually nothing we should avoid. It's actually something we should sometimes seek even to create creativity. who in this room is an educated engineer or computer scientist? Maybe you raise your hand. Okay, most of you. What have we learned through our school and study times? We have learned that whatever we do, if we just analyze the problem enough, then we are able to solve it, right? That's what we have learned. So we know we have a super strong bias to the complicated domain. We always think analysis will give us the answers. Now, this model tells us something different. It tells us, okay, complicated analyzing things is valid in some context, but when you deal with organizations, then it's rather probe, sense, respond. Then you're in a complex domain. And that's one of the strongest learnings that I got from looking at this model, that you really, I need to enhance my leadership bandwidth from analysis and those kind of things towards a more experimental style. Yeah, very important to keep in mind. And because there is also this small area in the middle which is called disorder. Disorder is you're confronted with the situation and you don't know, is it now obvious, complicated, complex, or chaotic? You don't know what to do. What you usually do, you have a bias, you fall into your preferred style, and most engineers then fall into analysis. Then you analyze forever instead of trying something. And that slows us really, really down. Okay, so far that part of the theory. I saw this model. It was for me extremely enlightening. I went home, I was full of energy, and I was thinking, what do I do with this? And I was thinking, how is it with an agile transformation? Is an agile transformation now an obvious problem we have to deal with, or is an agile transformation a complicated or complex or chaotic? So we hope it's not chaotic, an agile transformation. We should try to avoid that. So let's try to keep it in the complex domain. There is no recipe for doing an agile transformation. It's complex. So what we found is that when you think what kind of challenge it is, you find out that an agile transformation is an emergent change of your organizational human system. It emerges. And then that means that we need to, as a better approach, is to address the system, the human system in the organization. And that means this thing needs to emerge. We know, we have read the Agile Manifesto and so on. We know what we would like to emerge from the organization, but we cannot guarantee that exactly this thing is emerging. What should we do? What would be the experiment? So, yeah. You can now sit there and wait that the right thing emerges, which can take you a while. Question was, can you speed up emergence? And of course you can. You can do the experiment. So how can we identify suitable system change experiments? So having seen Cynefin, finding this very useful, coming home, thinking, how can I apply this? I was thinking, it's fantastic, but I have no clue how to apply this. How can it help me to find change experiments? And I asked a number of people, and nobody really had a good answer on that one. So we in Ericson, we started to develop an own tool or a helper for this. And that's the thing I'm going to share with you right now. How can we influence a human system? So first of all, we need to understand one thing about human systems, and especially when it comes to organizations, and that is the topic of constraints. So what is this? All societies have shared rules or constraints. That's what we call civilization. There is a rule saying you cannot kill your neighbor because this is not good for us as a society. Yeah, and in a similar way, somebody disagrees, or so we all have these kind of shared rules, and these shared rules are either set by laws or regulations or whatever, or they emerge. There's also these unwritten rules. Sometimes teams, you have maybe seen this, there is some rules within the teams, they emerged from a team. Nobody has ever written it down, but this is how you're doing things. Or in Germany, like at which times of a day in a week it's allowed to mow your lawn in your garden. Unwritten rules. Okay, so they are either set or they emerge. Now, in a company context, of course, we set and manage constraints. There's company policies and so on. That's usually what we do. So, what constraints do we have in a company? What are the things we are managing in our companies? Ideas? I mean, I heard one thing before. People, we manage people. Of course, people management is everywhere in companies. Are people a constraint? That was a tricky question because we thought, okay, we manage people, but what do we really mean with that? So that led to that we thought, okay, maybe we try to influence people by setting constraints around what behavior we accept and what behavior we do not accept at work, and what capabilities people can have. So we can manage behavior by giving feedback. We can go, and actually, I don't even think you can manage behavior because behavior is emerging all the time. You can try to influence it by giving feedback. But that's something we do in most of our companies. I think many companies have this at least yearly feedback conversations or something like this. And then, of course, we also can manage or influence capabilities in the sense of we can give people training and coaching. We can, for example, we can add people to a team with a certain competence. We can change the diversity of teams and so on. So by this, we can change our capabilities. Then other constraints in our companies are the pretty obvious ones, like processes. Okay, we can say we have to work according to this process, but not according to that. And another constraint, we can influence our structures, like organizational structures and so on. Now, an interesting observation when you look at those four is that they are forming an interdependent system themselves. Let me give you an example. At Ericson, we have maintenance processes, which are part of the process, and structurally, we have goals and targets related to those maintenance processes. So, for example, you have a trouble report is coming in, and a trouble report can have different priority levels, A, B, C, D. And let's say for an A priority TR, you have 24 hours to fix it. For B priority, maybe you have 3 days, something like this. And that's in the structure, the target. Now, knowing this, what is the people behavior when an A priority TR comes in that cannot be solved in 24 hours? Something comes in and it's really, really bad. How do people react? So one reaction is, oh, I think this problem is not in my subsystem, it's in your subsystem. Or, no, I don't think it's an A priority TR. I think you made it, it's not that bad, it's a B priority. So instead of fixing the problem, we start discussing other things. So this is a typical thing, like people start to play around with within the constraints that were set. So what emerges is not always the wanted thing. Another example, behavior. A new boss comes into the organization. This boss does not have an agile mindset. What happens to the organization? Yeah, immediately, maybe some processes start to change, maybe some reorganization, some structure changes. People around that person start to change their behavior because they get different feedback on what behavior is beneficial and what not, and so on. So this is really a system in itself. Good, so what we did with this one was creating a tool, which we have an awkward name for, sorry for that. we usually call it the ecosystem tool because this is the tool we try to use to influence the ecosystem or define change experiments. So how does it look? Every good tool is a 2x2 matrix. So it's a 2x2 matrix. And into the 4 quadrants, we put the 4 constraint domains, like behavior, capability, structures, and processes. Then we put some nice arrows there to remind ourselves when we do the exercise, and you do this on a whiteboard or a flip chart or whatever you like, you remember this is interdependent. Then when you want to change an organization, there's one thing missing yet that we need to put there. What could that be? the goal. We want to know where we want to go, because change just for the sake of change is no change. So we need to understand what goal are we after. You can use this tool also for analyzing a problem. So, and what you do then is you look at what are, to reach this desired state or the goal, what are the wanted behaviors that we want to see emerging? What are the not wanted behaviors that we do not want to see emerge, or that we have today that we want to get rid of? Then you think, what capabilities do we need to get to the desired state, and what capabilities would actually support the wanted behaviors? What processes do we have that would help us reach the desired state, and in how far do those processes support the wanted behaviors, and so on. So that's how you do it. A strong recommendation, we tried this tool, when was it? 2.5, 3 years ago it started, and we did this a number of times. In the beginning, we left it completely open to the teams who were using this, where they start. And an observation we had was that people or teams who started on process or structure, they got stuck in process and structure. Why is that? Because this is our cozy corner. This is the super deep analysis thing. Process and structure can really drag you down. So the recommendation is, if you do the exercise, start on the behavior quadrant and then go from there around the paper. And yeah, then to think a little bit deeper, we can say on the behavior side, behavior is the thing you maybe see, but there are some underlying things below the surface, like mindset and attitudes, values, and people needs. So maybe a question, how many of your companies have company values? Usually very many. So what does this tell us? Well, you cannot say this. I cannot go to you and say, oh, from tomorrow onwards, this is your value. Yes, sir. No, this doesn't work. So what the company actually hopes is that by expressing a wanted company value, you express a wanted behavior. And what we found is much stronger than talking about values is really talking about concrete behavior. On the capability side, we have competences, skills, number of people on a team, the right competence on the team, and so on. But there's below the surface also something like hidden talent that you can maybe use. And then on the process side, we have processes, practices, tools, and you maybe have also something like habits below the surface. And the same thing on the structure side, like organizational structure, governance structures, compensation structures, roles as such, and so on. And then below the surface, we have all these informal networks that we have in our companies. Okay, so what you do with this is a typical plan, do, check, act cycle. You look at your system, at your organization. You think, is my vision still valid? That's, by the way, an important thing to do all the time when you iterate this. You think, is my vision or my wanted state still the thing I'm after or not? Or has it moved? What supports your vision? What doesn't? And from that one, you define a change experiment. What are the concrete things you're going to do? And then you take change actions, see what emerges, look at the system again, and so on. So this is a typical cycle. All right. So that was now a bit theoretical. I would like to show you this tool a bit in action. And now we go back to the Agile transition we had and look at this from this systems thinking tool perspective. So iteration 1. So we run in iterations. The thing, first of all, we did not the Agile transformation just to become Agile. We did the Agile transformation with the goal to have better customer satisfaction, better quality, and better time to market. Those were the ultimate goals we were after. So how to reach that? So first of all, we thought on the behavior side, we need to really empower teams. We will be so much better if people can really take authority and take their decisions and so on. We need to empower them. Okay, how can we empower them? How can we support them? So on the structure side, we can empower them by building cross-functional teams. And that meant for us, we had in the past silo organizations, so we had a front-end organization that was dealing with system architecture requirements and all these kind of things. So the system design guys in one department, the development in another department, and the testing in a third department. And what we said is, this is not supporting the cross-functional team thinking. We merge all of these departments. So this caused a huge reorganization of the whole organization. To support it more, of course, we need to train and coach the teams. So we need to have a real good agile coaching there. Then we said on the process side to support it, we want to start with Scrum. Scrum, of course, comes with some roles like Scrum Master and Product Owner. Then, of course, if you have empowered teams, they need to be empowered by somebody who gives the power away. And that means that leaders need to empower the teams. So what leaders need to have is wanted leadership behavior. So we were sitting there and thinking, what are wanted leadership behaviors? And then it was also about recruiting leaders with the right mindset. And that was one of the scary things in this whole thing. Because of merging of organizations, really reshuffling, we said that all leaders have to apply for a new role. So no leader was just granted a guarantee to have a role in the new organization. And that was, of course, an extremely scary moment for all the leaders, because it meant that during the recruitment, of course, then we were looking at, okay, what are now the recruitment criteria? It was not the classical recruitment criteria we had for leaders before. It was much more agile influenced. So then we got new leaders into the organization. Retrospectives. We said retrospectives is maybe part of Scrum framework, but retrospectives we want to use on all levels, also in the leadership teams, because this is a very powerful instrument. The Agile Manifesto was guiding us in understanding wanted behavior. We said we need to collaborate very closely between development and product management. So in Ericson, we have a divide organizationally between product development and product management. Product management pretty much looking to the customer base, which is internationally distributed, making product strategies and so on, and then development doing the development of all this stuff. Yeah, new decision model. We invented practices around uncertainty management because we said Scrum of Scrum will not really work for 2,000 people. So we said we use Scrum of Scrum for larger features that we want to develop. So when we have something like 5, 6 Scrum teams who are working on one thing, then we put them into a Scrum of Scrum mode. But for the total portfolio of features we need to implement, we rather invent another practice, and that was what we called uncertainty management. Yeah. What happened? So this was a huge change experiment, as you can guess. 1st of January 2010, really everything, all the puzzle pieces thrown into the air. And what came out of this one? So the first one is full leadership support for the change emerged straight away. And that was really good. So this idea of re-recruiting all leaders was really a successful step for us. Another thing that emerged, that teams were ignoring the committees. So for that one, you need to understand one thing. In the past, because you know that refactoring architecture, system architecture, product architecture is a really, really expensive thing. So what we had was a number of really guru architects who are the shepherds of the architecture, and they form a formal committee. So a team would go and make an architecture proposal, and then it's reviewed and it needs to be approved by the architecture committee. Now with the Agile transformation, the Agile coaches in the beginning were saying, okay, but you're a self-contained team, nobody who's not on the team can tell you anything. So that was a bit of a scary moment as well, because we thought, okay, now we are endangering the architecture. On the other hand, what we understand is that it's not good if a team works 6 weeks on an architecture proposal, then after 6 weeks, the committee comes and says, it's nice what you have done in the last 6 weeks, but it's wrong, you need to do it like this. Then we have wasted time. So we need to solve the problem somehow. So what we said is, first of all, we reinforce the architect and committee roles, because we simply do not have enough architects to have an architect in every single Scrum team. It's a scarce resource. How do we do that? At the same time, we have said to the architects in the committees that there is a new wanted behavior from you guys, and that is, don't wait 6 weeks, rather become mentors of the teams, be with the teams, and have frequent interactions with the teams to guide them along. That was the guidance we gave. Okay, next iteration. What happened then? Working software is the only progress indicator. Somebody said that or wrote it even down, with the effect that documentation is not handled appropriately. Who needs a user manual? So that was also one of those traps we fell in. I figured out that this is happening in quite a number of companies. So what did we do? First of all, from a behavior point of view, we want people to focus on everything that the product comprises of, not only the code, everything that is expected by a customer. And that means we need to put higher priority on things that are non-code. And that we did by clarifying the product owner role. So we asked the product owners to watch out for that one a bit more. Next iteration. Well, collaboration, development, product management started to work well. So how did that come? So what we have started structurally was to have collaboration meetings between product management and product development. So we had monthly total feature portfolio joint planning sessions where we were bringing together both views. We have paired the product owner with a product manager. So product owner more focusing on the technical and team aspects, and the product manager more focusing on the customer aspect. And by this, the collaboration was really, really improving. But another thing emerged, and that was that teams were starting to diverge because they had big discussions about my Agile is more Agile than your Agile. Maybe you recognize this also in some companies. I've also seen these Agile religious wars. So who has the better practice? And of course, my own practice is better than somebody else's practice. And if we have to merge our software, integrate our software, maybe you need to do it my way and not your way. So that led to that we have a bit of a sub-optimization on an end-to-end flow. So that was the moment where we understood the thing with constraints. Before that, we have not actively really managed constraints. Then we understood, okay, there are these constraints, and we need to have empowerment within boundaries. There are some things that all have to do in the exact same way. Otherwise, we, in our entirety, don't work together and produce good results. So on the process side, we said, okay, which process and tools are mandatory and which ones are optional? And this is a tough call, I can tell you, because you have a tendency to overdo it. It needs to be just enough of things that are absolutely mandatory, because you want to leave your teams as much freedom as possible to determine themselves how they want to work. But when it comes, for example, about continuous integration on a solution level, where many teams are integrating together, you need to have one framework that everybody adheres to. And what we also did was, in the definition of done, we have strengthened more the end-to-end view. Okay, what happened next? All of a sudden, what came out was we don't need commitment decisions anymore. That's also a very interesting story, how an organization can mature. We had a decision model when we started, which said we have a go decision where we all agree with product management together that now we want to get going with the development. Now we really want to invest money. A huge number of people are going to work on this one now. Then we had a commitment decision. So that was the moment where the team committed to the product manager that, yes, this feature will definitely be delivered to the customer at that date. And we were all agreeing that this is absolutely needed. And then there was the decision that now we are all ready to ship it to the customer. Why didn't we need commitment decisions anymore? Well, we had started this uncertainty management practice, which is a practice that can be explained in 2 seconds. We were showing not exact delivery dates, but delivery ranges. So instead of saying this will be ready on 1st of December, 8:15 in the morning, which is a precisely wrong estimate, we have said it will be ready between October and February. And we were actively managing and visualizing these ranges. And by this, because we could visualize, and when you see the range not shrinking sprint by sprint, you feel that you get an early warning indicator that something is maybe not working out as you thought, and that gives you the possibility to act. And because of that, the organization arrived at the conclusion that actually we don't need these commitment decisions anymore, because at any point in time, we can look into our plan, we see those ranges for the deliveries, and we can say, okay, if the customer wants it here and the range is like this, then I know what I can promise to the customer and what not. So we removed this decision from the model. Next iteration. Okay, teams want to be closer to the customer. So they learned now how to work in Scrum, Agile ways, and they felt a bit disconnected because now we had this product owner and then the product manager who's basically talking to the customer. So how can we get closer to the customer? So we are starting to think about how can we link teams to the communication between product management and customer. We were looking into models on the process side, how we can have early customer interactions, early customer demos, and so on. So that's what we did about this one. Next iteration, what emerged? Teams are overcommitted. So they wanted to have contact to the customer, so some teams started to meet the customer. The customer is sitting in front of the team, I need this feature on that date, and the team is like, yes, I want to make you happy, you will have it on this date. Making promises. So, of course, we are always blue-eyed. Our plans never really work out as we thought. So it was very often overcommitment, and the teams, because they were themselves giving personally the commitment to that customer, that promise, they were getting really stressed on fulfilling that. So they worked days and nights and weekends to make it happen. So they really got stressed on this one. Maybe a healthy kind of stress, because it tells you need to learn something now. So what we discovered is that on the capability side, we need to learn, all of us, how to make realistic commitments. And that leads to the question, how can we handle a proper expectation management? That's something we are chewing on right now. How can we manage expectations? And there are things like a discussion about who's the promise owner. Like if the promise owner is in a customer unit somewhere in a market far away and the promise fulfiller is the team, how do those parties connect? So those are the kind of discussions I'm having now at the moment with a number of people in Ericsson. So this journey continues. It's not stopped. It will never stop. All the time something happens, it's a fun journey because it gets never boring and you learn all the time. And like this thing with the commitment decision, you really sometimes see now the whole organization has reached a different level of maturity, which is just wonderful. Results, we started with this and we were really very positively surprised about the results because within the next 5 years after doing the transition, all our releases were on time. What has happened? Have we delivered all our scope on time? No. We said simply, we made a deal that timing is important, the most important thing for us. And because of this, we were saying, if timing is important, we need to compromise on something else, so we compromise on scope. So we were compromising on scope, and that was the deal and the handshake we had with our product managers. So they were all supporting this. At the end, everybody was happy. 50% less defects found at the customer side after the product release, which was an interesting side effect. We were not so much thinking about this, but just putting the teams cross-functional had this effect. I remember that in 2003, we had a 3 times better quality initiative, and because of the fantastic success, we had in 2005 another initiative which was called 10 times better quality. What do you think how much better the quality was due to these initiatives? 1%, 2%, something like this. I mean, no significant change. And then with this, all of a sudden, bang. And it was just, I think it was just the reorganization, putting people together, having together a focus on definition of done and quality. And of course, much better decisions through a significantly improved collaboration and interactions, especially between development and product management. So really a very good result. Summing up, So now you understand a bit better why an agile transformation is an emergent change of a human system. And you can run these system change experiments and see what emerges and then tune the next thing. And then this tool might help you to identify good change experiments. So I really recommend you to try it out. The slides will be available, so you can have it later on and experiment yourself with this. Somebody once asked me, how long was your sprint time? How much does an iteration take? And the answer to that one is that there is no fixed iteration length because things are emerging. So via the retrospectives on the leadership team level, we found the right point in time where we said, now we need to intervene and now we start a sort of next iteration. So only now in retrospective, I would call them iterations, but this was continuous work with the organization. All right. Questions?
So, any questions in the room? There. Switch on the mic.
Hey, I guess if you really changed your company so much on that size, there's also a change on contracts, on bonus systems, on the finance section, also on the strategy level. Could you say some words about this?
Mm-hmm. In the beginning, we did not change the reward or bonus systems, so this was not our primary thing. Those systems have evolved a little bit over time now, so we have less and less individual goals and targets, and we are focusing a bit more on team targets. We still have individual aspects there, but the focus on team and organizational result is much, much stronger. The finance section in the strategic plan, finance is not working in an agile way for us, which is sometimes giving us some pain. Although I must say that now also, especially last year, interacting, since the last year, I'm in a much more prominent role dealing with financial controllers and so on. Actually, it is pretty easy to talk to them because they understand risks and so on. And if you explain it in such a way, I don't talk agile with them, but I talk with them about uncertainty ranges and those kind of things. And that's a language they understand pretty easily. And I found a good way to communicate with them. So I don't see a big issue at the moment with that.
In your second iteration, you have shown us that all the leaders have been fully committed to the change. Mm-hmm. Was this before or after they had to apply for the new roles?
Before or after they had? Sorry.
Before or after they had to apply for the new roles?
Both. Yeah, it was especially after. Okay, so 1st of January we have a new organization and the leadership positions are opened in the job system. So most leaders got again a leadership position, not all of them. I think opening it up really also contributed to the mindset change in the way that all of a sudden you understand, I need to reapply, and now the criteria are different. So you get a much better focus on these kind of things. So I think the recruitment process in itself had quite an effect on this one, because the recruitment process was basically the way to communicate the expected leadership behaviors into the organization.
Okay, and who decided that this recruiting had to take place?
That was the head of this 2,000 people organization. That was, by the way, another interesting thing that has happened. As I said, we were preparing this almost for a year in this leadership team of this 2,000 people organization. And in the second part of that year, you started to see how some people on the leadership team started to behave a little bit political, because they were smelling, it's going that way, and maybe that organization is something for me. So I start shaping what this organization should do and so on. And my boss at that time did something really, really clever. She said, you know what? None of you will have your job on 1st of January. You need to qualify and reapply. And that killed the politics immediately, because you didn't know what job you will end up with on 1st of January.
So, thanks, Hendrik. I think we